Good morning. I hope you have your caffeine of choice. I've got mine. Since this is the first podcast, I'm going to start by saying I'm not really comfortable recording myself speaking, mostly because I am hearing impaired. I do have a speech impediment, so I'm definitely not the ideal person to make a podcast. That being said, as someone who believes in dispersing knowledge in a variety of formats, because the world is full of people, different learning styles, different ways of acquiring knowledge and skills and ideas, ways that are not always comfortable. I felt it was important that I venture into a podcast and give it a try. So the podcast is broken into a side A and a side B. This gives you an idea of what generation I'm from. It's followed up by a LinkedIn newsletter. So you have a side A 1 week, LinkedIn newsletter the following week. And the newsletter will shed light on the issue that's being discussed in side A. Side A is kind of the exposure of the problem or issue in small museums. After the newsletter is the Side B podcast, which comes out and I'll discuss active solutions or outcomes based on what I talked about in Side A. Today, I'm going to talk about the ADA compliant problem. Welcome to the Small Museum Advantage, Episode 1, Side A, the ADA compliant problem. 20 years ago, if you had asked me what accessibility meant in museums, I probably would have talked about ramps, elevators, parking spaces, and accessible restrooms. Today, accessibility includes something many museums never thought about until we were forced to. Websites, PDFs, online forums, and digital content. And if you work in a government-run museum, which I do, you've probably felt the recent push to comply with the Department of Justice WCAG 2.1 Level AA digital accessibility requirement. I know I have. At my institution, the directive was straightforward. Make your website and your PDF ADA compliant. That was it. No explanation of what that meant, no guidance on where to start, no workflow, no example, and no training. Just a series of emails, reminders that the deadline was approaching. The assumption seemed to be that once the word ADA compliant was spoken, everyone would somehow magically know what to do next. The reality was very different. In my office, no one knew how to use Adobe Acrobat's accessibility tools except for me. No one knew how to check reading order, tag a PDF, create alternative text, or verify whether a document would work with a screen reader. Likewise, no one knew which website design choices affected accessibility or how accessibility features actually function within our content management system. Here's the thing. I didn't learn these skills through workplace training. I didn't learn them through the county initiative. I learned them on my own because accessibility has always mattered to me, personally and professionally. And it has become the foundation of my museum service. So when questions started appearing in the office, I became the unofficial translator. I helped colleagues where I could. I shared what I knew. I explained accessibility checkers, heading structures, alternative tech, and PDF tagging. But I kept wondering, if accessibility was suddenly such a priority, why wasn't anyone teaching people how to do it? A month later, we did actually have a website training session. Finally, I thought, this is where we'll learn. This is where someone takes us by the hand and explains the practical side of accessibility. The trainer began by explaining that the new website platform was designed to help ensure ADA compliance. That sounds promising. Then she said it again, and again, and again. During what became a 120-minute training session, yes, that's 2 hours, I know, the phrase ADA compliant came up constantly. At one point, I started tallying 36 times. 36. That's once every 3 minutes. Yet, not once did anyone explain what accessibility barriers we were trying to remove. Not once did anyone explain how a screen reader experiences a web page. Not once did anyone explain why heading structures and nesting mattered. Not once did anyone explain alternative text and how to generate them. Not once did anyone explain color contrast and why it was important. In PDF, we didn't discuss it at all. At one point, I asked who and how the website would be ADA compliant. The answer was a legal definition. When I asked for specifics, I was told the information would be in the style guide. A style guide we did not have access to. A style guide that many of us still don't have access to. The more I listened, the more I realized the phrase ADA compliant had become a substitute for understanding. Everyone was talking about compliant. Very few people were talking about accessibility. They are not the same thing. The more I thought about that training, the more I realized the problem wasn't that people didn't care about accessibility. The problem was that everyone was focused on compliance. We were talking about regulation. We were talking about deadlines. We were talking about requirements. We weren't talking about visitors, either to the website or to the museum. I realized the questions we were asking were all wrong. Accessibility needs to be more than making a website eligible for screen reading. It needs to be usable by everyone. It's the same for museums. We need to change our question and start asking, can a visitor find our accessibility information before they visit? Can they tell whether they can navigate our building? Can they find out where the stairs are? Whether seating is available? Whether captions exist? whether the restroom is accessible, whether they will be able to participate in the experience that we are offering. Because here's the uncomfortable reality. A museum can spend months making its website technically accessible and still fail to answer the questions visitors need answered before they decide to come. And if visitors can't find that information, many of them won't call. I know I won't. I know I didn't. Me, a museum professional, went to an art museum website to find out what accommodations were available for visitors with hearing loss. The page listed amplified hearing aids, but didn't explain what that meant. Was it an FM system, a neck loop, an over-the-ear receiver? Compatibility matters when you wear hearing aids. Then I read the instructions. Call in advance. Really? No, I'm not going to call. Maybe I'll email. As someone who's deaf, hard of hearing, I can't help but hear my mother's voice talking to the school staff. You wouldn't send a note to a blind child, so why would you call a deaf one? That quote has stayed with me for years because it captures something larger than this one experience. Accessibility isn't just about having accommodations, it's about making those accommodations accessible. So if your accessibility page tells deaf and hard of hearing visitors to call, you've created another barrier before they've even walked through your door. Now, fortunately, I was able to hunt around the website until I found an email address, but I shouldn't have had to. And many visitors won't. They won't email. They won't even ask. They will simply choose not to visit your museum. In next week's LinkedIn newsletter, The Small Museum Advantage, I'm going to explore why accessibility information is often missing, why museums frequently misunderstand what visitors are looking for, and why I self-identify with one statement from accessibility advocate Jenny Berry. If I can't find your accessibility information, I'm not coming. This is the title. This is the title article for next week's newsletter, published every month on the first Tuesday with a follow-up podcast on the second Tuesday. Tune in for Side B, A True Invitation, on July 14th. This podcast was hosted by Kaleidoscope Heritage Focus, a small museum service provider.